Hello, friends. How are you? This is Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, a conversation series between authors. We always like to say it's in conversation. When there's book events and things like that, and another author is interviewing you, it's an in conversation event. So this is basically an in conversation podcast where I talk to other authors and kind of figure out how their brain works. And some brains are more interesting than others, and some brains are fascinating, and some brains are super ass dark. And speaking of dark, today I had the huge thrill and pleasure and honor of talking to novelist Wendy Walker. So Wendy is all kinds of awesome. Just for background, she's the author of the psychological suspense novels All Is Not Forgotten, Emma in the Night Before, Don't Look for Me, and American Girl. And American Girl was actually an Audible #1 bestseller, which is awesome and amazing. Her novels have been translated into 23 foreign languages, top bestseller lists both nationally and abroad, and have been optioned for both television and film. And she writes decidedly dark things. So I knew that we were going to probably hit it off. And we did. She was fantastic to talk to. She's very revelatory and doesn't hold back, and that makes for the best kind of conversation possible, because you really kind of feel like you're getting to know the person and kind of how they approach writing and how they think about storytelling and how their past has informed all of those things. And it's funny, we finished the conversation, and this happens every now and then. We finish the conversation, we hang up, and I'm like, that was a really interesting person. I want to talk to this person more. So we got a chance to. We actually met for cocktails at BoucherCon at the World Mystery Writers Conference, and it was great. It felt like we were kind of just picking up off where we were left off from the podcast, and we had a fantastic conversation. So now I consider her my friend, which is fun. But I think you're going to like this one. She's fantastic. This is me talking to Wendy Walker.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. I went for a lovely bike ride this morning, so that's always a good way to start the day.
That's nice.
Before it gets to be 100 degrees here in Boulder.
It's so hot here already. But we're 2 hours, further along. Wait, hold on. I always forget this chair, it's like a dining room chair, and if I don't sit on a cushion, it looks like I have horns sticking out of my shoulder. So
you don't want horns? Doesn't that like
these little horns? Yes, not good. Oh, that's better. I'm up a little higher.
Were you? So you're in Connecticut.
I'm in Connecticut. Yeah.
So were you at Thriller Fest?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
Were you there?
I was. I was kind of keeping an eye out for you because I wanted to meet you, but it was dark at all the cocktail parties.
I feel like it was fast and furious.
So you could just commute into the city, like you didn't stay there?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I did stay there. I always stay there because otherwise I can't drive home in the condition I'm in after a night with those people. The minute I drove in was I was texting Vanessa Lilly. I'm like, where is this place? Because it's a new hotel. I'm like, I need to find the parking garage. And so she was trying to tell me what block the entrance was on and everything. And then, so she knew I was there. And 10 minutes later, I just got into my room. She's like, we're in room, whatever, come immediately. I'm like, okay. I didn't even unpack. I was in my, whatever, just sweats. And I walk in, glass of wine is in my hand. 2 minutes later, I'm swearing like a truck driver.
Yep. It was good to be back, right?
I was like, yes, I'm with my people.
Yeah, I was there 5 nights because I went early to teach at Craft Fest, and it was 5 nights of cocktail parties. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, everyone's back. It was great. It was nice, so nice to see people, and I've interviewed people on this show that I'd never met before that I got to see there, so that was kind of cool too.
It's been 3 years because we missed 2 of them. That's 3 years, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
it was good. So are you from New England originally?
I am. Yeah, I'm definitely an East Coast person, but I did live in Colorado.
Oh,
Uh,
whereabouts?
I lived in Colorado Springs when I was a teenager because I trained for figure skating.
Oh,
I lived,
oh, so you were good. If you're training,
oh,
were you training at the Olympic facility in Colorado Springs?
I was.
Holy shit.
Yeah, but I mean, I was never, I was young. So by the time I got to the age where I should have been, more of a hopeful, it was clear that I like really wasn't that good. And
Hmm.
so I quit when I was 16. So I never got to the point where I was, like on the cusp of making it. It was like, oh, she has some potential. Let's train her early. And then, turned out not so much. So then,
But that's still a big commitment, I'm not only in terms of time and
yeah.
cost, but just emotion to, I mean,
Oh
that's,
my God.
I mean,
didn't
I
even
think like
think
club
about
league,
that.
anything is bad. I can't imagine like, oh, we're going to go send our daughter to train for however long at the Olympic training facility.
Oh yeah, I have some stories, and actually, I have thought about writing it into a novel because after watching Yellow Jackets,
Hmm.
I was like, yeah, they got nothing on what happened in Colorado Springs. We weren't
Huh.
stranded on an island. We didn't kill and eat people, but came pretty close. I don't know.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should. I mean, that would certainly be a lot of good insights
Yeah.
mixed with a thriller.
Yeah, yeah, it's on the agenda. I don't know. I have so many other things that I'm like are coming before it, but
Yeah. Isn't that crazy how you just like, not that I think of like 3 books ahead of time because I only write standalones, but once I have a nugget of an idea, I'm like, okay, that'll be my next year,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then you think, and it's like all of a sudden, like if you have another idea, like, well, when am I going to do that? But that sounds really cool.
exactly. And so now I keep it on the computer. A little file of all of my ideas. And it's so funny to go back to it. I'm like, oh yeah, that idea from like 5 years ago where, blah, 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 blah happens. And then you know, and then you think it through and you run into all the obstacles that you came across when you first thought of the idea, like, oh yeah, but then now I've written myself into a corner, so that doesn't really work, and you realize why you didn't write that book. But it has happened where it's cropped up in other opportunities and other projects. I'm like, oh, I was able to use that idea, but just not the way I thought. So I try to keep track of them.
Yeah, and you as a person and as a writer, you change over those 5 years too. And
Yes.
so for example, like what I'm working on now, I've had in my mind for about 6 months, and I'm like, I really want to write something exceptionally dark. Like I want this book to be horrifying,
As
and that's
opposed to your other books.
well, 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 yeah,
What are we
maybe.
talking here?
But I'm excited for it. But like 2 years ago, that wouldn't have excited me. I wanted to do something maybe more straightforward or whatever. And so I could look at ideas from a few years ago. I'm like, that's not who I am anymore, at least not right now as
Yeah.
a writer, or technology changes or the zeitgeist changes. And like, I don't really want to write anything that has politics in it now. For example, maybe 5 years ago, I wanted to, I don't know.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is so true. And their and own voices and Me Too and so many I mean when I wrote All Is Not Forgotten, and I know you have a book that involves a sexual assault of a teenage
Mhm.
girl. So All Is Not Forgotten, that's where it begins with this brutal assault of this teenage girl. And I don't think I could write that today. I don't
No.
know. I don't think I could. And in fact, you know, that was my breakout novel. That's what established my career. And there were movie rights and all this stuff. And now that is the one project that my film people just don't even go back out with
Yeah.
because it's still like, oh, the world is still not ready for this story.
Yeah, and it is interesting because like, and what you consider dark, like, because I'm a much more squeamish reader than I am a writer.
Me
So
too.
if I read like sexual assault, like I really struggle with that. Like, I understand its place and its purpose, but I don't like to read it.
Yeah.
I can write it, but I'll try to write it almost very roundabout.
Yeah.
But the other thing is like when you're changing as a writer, like after the pandemic, like I just got filled with this overwhelming sense of nostalgia. Like I didn't want to write about present day. So, the book coming out next year, it takes place in 1987. I'm like, that's my happy. I was a senior in high school. That's my happy place. And
Yes,
that,
me
even though it's a
too.
dark thriller, like I wanted to, but I also want to be in a place where there's no cell phones and there's no ability to call for help.
That helps so much. So wait, is this the dark book, or are you writing something even darker?
No, this is the not so dark book.
Okay.
But
So you've gone back to the darkness. What happened?
I think because I wrote a book that wasn't quite so dark, and my editor's like, where's the tension in the first 100 pages, and now I just like, oh man, this next book is going to scare the shit out of people. That's all I want to do.
It's funny, yeah. My last book, Don't Look for Me, is probably, people have told me it's my scariest book. And I don't know that it's my darkest book, but it's my scariest book. And I had so much fun writing it because I was in complete control. So I knew what was happening. So it didn't scare me. But I think if I read it, it would scare me.
Yeah.
I think I would have nightmares about it.
And when people tell you you've given them nightmares, that is like the greatest compliment.
Yes.
Like that makes my day every time. I'm like, oh, thank you.
What is wrong with us?
So many things. So you're growing up in New England, and where do you think your creative spark comes from? Can you trace it genetically? Was it just were you just a book nerd?
Oh, how much time do we have?
As much time as you want.
Oh yeah, I can trace all of it. I mean, I can trace it all. And I guess it starts with an outwardly appearing idyllic childhood with not such idyllic circumstances inside, and with a turbulent marital situation within my family, and an emotionally abusive father, to be honest. Which through my research and also my work as a family law attorney, I fully understand the impact, especially on the years that you don't even remember, from 0 to 3. So there's that. And then there's getting sent to, I shouldn't say being sent, but going to Colorado when I was 13 to 16.
Now, did your parents stay together? Were they still together when you were 13?
Yes, they stayed together until I was in my 30s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so there were those years which had their own, traumas, I would call them, and the things that happened to me, but also that I witnessed at a young age. And I think what happened, so there's sort of this psychological components that I had to deconstruct as I got older, and really dealt with in therapy, to be honest. When I had a really, what I would consider a successful marriage, even though we ended up divorcing, but we have 3 beautiful children. We're friendly, friends even. We've raised the children together peacefully. They turned out well, I think. But so I consider that a successful marriage, even though we ultimately
I'm the exact same way.
Yeah, but other relationships were a signal to me that there was some stuff going on. So I did a lot of deconstruction in therapy to figure out how that childhood played into me. But that is so informative when I'm writing characters, how childhood trauma affects us for the rest of our lives, and in what ways, and how it comes out. And then also working as a family law attorney, I got even more training into that area, but also into the sociopathic illnesses. So there's that whole piece.
How old were you when you started therapy?
I was in my 30s. So I was in the middle of my marriage, and I was noticing things that weren't quite right in just the way I was feeling and how I thought I should be feeling. And and then continued a few years after my divorce just to sort out, everything. And it was extremely helpful, really understanding the pieces. Like for me, I was very clear with my therapist, like, I want to understand the mechanics, what is going on in my brain and my body that I do not see, that I don't understand, and the explanation of, the voices that are in your brain that are left over from childhood, that you don't know are there. It's almost like this inner child that's always talking to you and
Hmm.
screaming to you because that child is, still stuck in that place. And I was, I didn't want to just sit and talk and cry and hear how to move forward. I wanted to be able to understand how these things really impacted me. And so now I understand how they impact my characters. So,
But you weren't coming at it at a place of like needing to know for the purpose of writing. It's almost like you had this sense of logic that you had to
yes,
fulfill. You know.
yes, and I even to this day I can, when I will relate it, as being a writer, when there is any kind of rejection or any bump in the road, I immediately go to worst case scenario.
Uh-huh.
The sky is falling. I will never write again. I need to go on ladders.com and find a new job. Like I don't, I am, and because of the way that my skating career unraveled and that piece of the psychology is with me as well. So, and I know that, and I can say to myself, okay, hold on. Like
Mhm.
this is not real. This is this other part of you that's like, left over from the past. And
Because you've been given these tools through
because that's,
therapy in order
yeah,
to do that.
right. And because the wiring is in my brain, I mean, you're sort of hardwired. Like your brain is hardwired by the time you're 24, 25, a little bit younger in women than in men. And you can't really undo that. The best you can do is sort of learn how it's hardwired so you can sort of intercept it before it causes you to do extreme things like go find a job on ladders.com.
Yeah, so you're
But
saying
yeah,
that you won't avoid, no matter how old you are, you're not going to be able to avoid, if you're hardwired to overreact, that's still going to happen. But
yeah,
now you will at least be able to approach it from a place of curiosity and logic and say,
yes,
I understand why this is happening. It sucks. I can't control it, but at least I can prohibit it from making me do something that maybe before
it's
therapy I would have done something
yes,
extreme.
you might have acted on it. And in fact, in doing a lot of research for my books, which often involve, characters who are on the sociopathic sort of spectrum, and speaking to therapists who treat those patients, they will tell you that they cannot be cured. You can't cure a narcissist.
Mhm.
What a narcissist who actually comes to seek help and seek treatment usually does so because he or she is afraid of losing something, a marriage, a relationship, a job. And the only thing that they can do is create a new playbook to curb their behavior. And it's almost like they have to monitor all of their actions um, as they are receiving data from people. So if a narcissist wife, is crying, for example, the narcissist almost has to open the playbook to page 10 and say, okay, wife is crying, must ask what's wrong,
Right.
must then listen, must then ask a follow-up question,
Right. And
don't
the reality of that, what makes it interesting for the purposes of a character in a thriller is that's going to eventually blow up.
yeah,
You can only
exactly.
contain
Right.
that for so long.
Well, and our characters are never in therapy because they have to be
Right. They're not
extremely
trying.
messed up. No,
There's
they're not
nothing wrong with
trying.
them. They do what they do and they're right all the time.
Exactly. But the other thing I think that came out of this experience of being away from home at such a young age is I had to learn to really evaluate people way before I should have had to do that. I should have had really my parents around to help protect me and
Right. You didn't have
navigate.
that buffer.
I didn't have the buffer. And in a competitive environment like figure skating, where everyone is out to get you, including the grown-ups, like there were a lot of like skating moms hovering around who had moved to Colorado they'd left their families behind and moved to be with the skater and left the other kids home with dad or whatever. And they're brutal, ruthless. And so, you would sort of trust someone and then realize that, and then get stabbed in the back at like a young age and
Oh my
realize,
God.
oh my gosh, grown-ups are not safe. Not
Yeah.
no one is safe until proven safe. So I think that is what eventually led me to writing, because I have always been really interested in what motivates people and what motivates behavior. and psychology. So,
but it was a circuitous route a little bit, right? Because you obviously got your JD and worked in family law, which feels like maybe was that at all, are you seeing the ties of like that was informed by your own kind of domestic situation growing up and wanting, was there a sense of like, I want to help, families in trouble?
I mean, that would make perfect sense, but it really was not that way.
All right. It's just my armchair psychology over here.
Try, but no, I mean, it's such a long road. So I was, no, I actually, I only pursued things that had a clear path to success. So in investment banking, and then I was a corporate litigator, and then I got married and took time off. And that's when I started writing, because I really wanted to do something at home. And back then, my gosh, there wasn't even the internet. Do you remember like plugging your phone line into AOL? It was like, for 5 minutes, and then you could check one email and it would,
right,
give up. So I actually wonder if this had happened to me with the technology we have today, if I would have started writing, because I was desperate for something to do at home that felt productive, like it might lead to something. And writing a book was actually the only thing that I could come up with. And I did love storytelling. So I started writing. And then after my divorce, I went back to the law because I hadn't really become financially successful writing. And that's the only place out in suburbia where I could find work, was in family law. So I kind of fell into it, but it was a great fit because I was divorced. So I was sort of the best person in some ways to deal with certain types of clients who really needed someone to understand what they were going through. And it's not, there's a steep learning curve, and then it sort of levels off.
And we have a mutual friend in Ken. So Ken Potash,
yes. Oh my gosh.
I saw him. So we were roommates at Cornell for
that's right.
2 years. And I saw him recently because he was back at reunion and I was there for my niece's graduation. And he mentioned you, and he's like, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know Wendy. Like, I don't know if I've met her, but I know her. And she's like, she's so like quiet and nice. And I read her book and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with this lady? I'm like, oh yeah, that happens all the time with us.
It's so funny he said that, because my Achilles heel in divorce law was that I would get so activated because you could just see like what the right outcome should be. And it's really not that kind of law. It really is like a gloves off, like, bare-fisted fight to the death, and the lawyers use all sorts of trickery. And for me, I was like, Georgetown Law School, law review, like corporate litigation. I'm like, this is wrong. And I feel like I spend most of the time like yelling and swearing at other lawyers. So that's very nice that Ken remembers me that way, because we actually met as adversaries in a very difficult case. And so I think he's blocking out a lot of.
He is very chill. But
I send a lot of my people, my like closest people, I send to Ken.
Oh, that's nice. What I find interesting about you is that you've, if you look at kind of the areas in which you've worked over the years, you're in a lot of high pressure, maybe not so much of a happy environment situations. I think of corporate finance. So I went, I'm a business background. I still have another full-time job, and I've worked in the corporate world and analytics for years and years and years, and consulting. And so I know a lot of people who went to like corporate finance, Goldman Sachs, and that's hardcore, and any kind of litigation attorney, and then family law, where you just described it. Like I would come home and just be in a fetal position because I would be so depressed. And then then the writing is maybe like became this whole release for you, but you write dark stuff too. So that's just curious to me that you must have a very thick soul, to be able to kind of just not have that defeat you on a daily basis when you're going through all those different phases.
It's like you can, you're in complete control when you're writing.
Yes.
And I think for me, And that is what is so appealing, that when I sit down to write, I'm in control, until my editors and agents get involved, but
Right.
I'm in control of what happens. And I can go into a really, concentrated, like down a rabbit hole of thought where nobody's interrupting me. And I found that when I was working in the corporate world, first of all, the motivation there is very different. It's, you're there to make money. And yes, your immediate goal is to help the client, or whatever, your type of work you're doing. But your goal overall, the firm's goal, is to make money. And not that we don't want to make money as authors, but my gosh, if we were motivated by that, I don't know that any of us would
Yeah.
be writing.
It's a terrible reason to start
That's a
writing.
really bad reason. So I don't know what it is. What is it for you? And do you still work in that world? How do you combine those two
I
things?
do. Well, so because I fell into writing. Like I have no background in it. And when I was 33, I literally was taking a class one day and I was bored out of my mind. It was for continuing education. And I just started writing, to stave off the boredom. And then that turned into this 400-page manuscript. And I looked at it. I'm like, what just happened?
Oh my gosh.
And so I had to learn the industry from scratch, because I knew, first of all, I'm like, there's no way I can do both of these things. And there's no way I'm quitting my job because I don't know what this even is. And my goals were very small. And it eventually turned into more of a career, but I write an hour a day, and that's my happy time. I lock myself in a room and I don't outline, so I don't know what's going to happen next. So I just like,
Wow.
see where we go today. And that I get excited because I don't think about it at all during the day. And then I sit down, I'm like, oh yeah, this world, let's figure out what she does now.
Wow. So do you write at night? Like,
yeah, 5 p.m. I pour myself a cocktail and I lock myself in a room and I just go into a place and, 500,000 words, and then I'm done. And, you can get a book done in like 8 months if you do that. If you know what you're doing, and I still don't know.
Yes, you have to know what you're doing. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah. The first book I wrote was such a disaster because I didn't know how to write a novel.
You don't know how to write. What's a chapter? I don't know. I guess I'll just stop here. Is that a chapter?
I'm like, narration versus dialogue. I'm like, okay, this is what has to happen. Everyone's talking. It was a shit show, that book, and it was.
Yeah.
But that's how I learned that, and I feel like I'm still developing tools.
Totally. But what I find is, and I've read a couple books on writing, but I find I'm very put off by being told how to write.
Yeah.
Like when somebody sits down, it's like, well, it's got to be a 3-act story. You got to have the hero's journey and all that. I'm like, fuck that. Like I write like this feels right to me, and I've learned over time what feels right and what doesn't, and it shifts. And of course, you get feedback, and that's critically important.
Yeah.
And your editor and your critique groups and stuff. But like, I don't ever think about like plot points. I'm like, has this person changed enough by the end of the story? I'm like, no, this is interesting to me, and hopefully it will be. But then whenever I'm in a class or teaching, I feel totally like, I have nothing to add here because I don't know how to write. I just know what works for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way when I'm asked to teach a class. I can talk about the tools, and I can talk about, the tools that I've learned, but one of the things I always keep in mind is I don't like a lot of dialogue. When I'm reading, if I see dialogue, I start skimming it. It bothers me.
Oh, that's so interesting. I think I'm almost the exact opposite.
Are you? So I'm like, everyone stop talking and just tell me what you're feeling inside. I want your internal thoughts. Unless
sure. That's important.
I get like, I don't want to hear them just having some random conversation, unless they're having like a heated conversation or it's really tense. But if that's the method of sort of giving the reader the information the reader needs, I would much rather get it in another form. But that's just me personally.
Well, this is coming from the girl at 13 who was studying people And because everything you've told me leads me to believe that you are so much more interested in characters rather than plot, for example, because
Yes.
like
Oh my gosh, so much more.
and that's why you want this internal, you want to know what they're feeling. And I think that's totally the right way to do it, because I approach everything I do from a place of emotion, because that's interesting to me, because I do want to know, what are you feeling? Like, how are you reacting to this? What I don't like is I don't like long descriptions of things, and here's
Me
what the house looks like.
Oh my gosh.
Who cares? Give the reader credit for that. But yeah, what are they feeling and how are they reacting to it? And what are they going to do next?
Where they are. I mean, in fact, my book that allowed me to stop practicing law and to write full time was All Is Not Forgotten. In that book, I had not been writing thrillers. I was writing general fiction, and I will not call it women's fiction. I will say that in my inside voice, because it's just fiction about women. Right. So it should not be qualified. But I was writing stories about women and their lives, and they were not thrillers. And then I almost stopped writing because I wasn't making any money, and I couldn't keep practicing law and raising 3 kids as, a sort of semi-single mom or divorced mom, and God forbid, trying to date someone and all these things and work out and do all this stuff and write books. Like, I couldn't keep doing it all. So I decided to write one more book. And my agent at the time was, I told her, like, I'm writing one more book. I want to do everything right. And then if it doesn't work, that'll be the universe telling me to just stop, because I can't keep doing this. And it had been 17 years since I had first gotten this ridiculous idea. And so she pointed me in the direction of the psychological thrillers, which had just exploded. And I had no idea really what I was doing. I read a couple, I sort of understood what they needed. At the time, the unreliable narrator was the end all be all. And I just sat down and started writing in the head of this really misogynistic, like, male psychiatrist about the rape of this 16-year-old girl. And she was originally 14. I had to change her to 16 because and even that now I couldn't do. But and writing this, like, diabolical character and being in his head every day was like absolute bliss. And I knew I had found, I was like, why is this so fun? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But being able to be that person, and maybe that's what it is like being able to, when you put yourself into that character and that darkness, you get to go to those places that that you have observed or that have bothered you or that have scared you in the past. And you just get to really deconstruct them and be them and control them in a way. But what was interesting about that book is there's almost no physical description of any room or place. There's a little bit about the town, but there's very little dialogue. It is almost all in the head of this doctor and his interactions with all of the characters in the story. And I didn't even realize that I was creating this sort of newish narration for, within the genre. But that was the book that ended up, being like launching me and enabling me to write full time. And who knew? Who knew? After, I was like, really? After 17 years, this is what happens? Like,
And I find it interesting that you were about to quit too, because I've heard that story before, and I don't think you.
I was. I really was.
I don't think you would have.
No, I really was. I really was. I had a total breakdown. I'd been working on this book for 2 years at 7 revisions. And, my agent was like, I really don't think I can sell this. There's no market for this. And I cried. I mean, I cried. I was in New York City. I just started crying on the street. I met my then at the time boyfriend for lunch. I couldn't stop crying during the lunch. The waitress came over. I think she probably thought he had done something terrible to me. So she was like being really mean to him. And he was like, you could see his face, like trying to signal, like, it's not me. I have no idea. I cried all the way home on the train. And I was like, all right, this, like, something has to give. Obviously this book is dead. That's 2 years of my life, all of my free time. I have no hobbies. I do nothing but write when my kids are with their dad. I get no downtime. Like, this is absurd. And so I really, really was going to stop and focus on my legal career. I had to make money. I had to like have a career. I mean, I lost money on my first 2 books.
Oh, totally. Like most books don't make hardly any money. I mean, for the broad audience, that's the reality of it. But I think, and I can't relate to a law career. It's got to be so much more high pressure and so many more hours than what I do. But I think if you're kind of a storyteller at heart, that burrows its way out of your skin at some point.
Yeah.
How much you try to like put band-aids on it, it's coming out.
I will say this: if I had been writing thrillers, I probably would have had a different reaction, because what I was writing, I felt like I'd said everything I needed to say about being a housewife in suburbia. I was kind of like done with all of my ranting and raving through my characters about what goes on out here. But I think if I had been writing in that genre, which I truly love, I truly, truly love it. And I've been getting darker as well, which is making me so, so, so happy. That I may not have, I probably would have had a different reaction. I'm sure it would have nagged at me like, oh, I'll just write this one more.
Yeah, and it's almost like you found, through happenstance or through advice, you found kind of the voice that you were probably meant to have all along, right?
And all of my books have to be toned down. Like the ending of that first book, I had to be changed to I had 3 possible endings. I had to go with the mildest one. They all get toned down, and which is fine. I always just go for it. And then I let other people tell me if I've gone too far.
Yeah, but I always you lose perspective, right? Because you were in the book, and my endings to me are always like excessively hopeful. Like there's and like, but so nice. That's not how they're received. They're like, what the fuck, this ending? I'm like, what it's a happy ending. It's like, no, it's terrible. Like it's so dark. Nobody's going to read it. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess I lost all perspective, but because I love ambiguity. Like I don't need.
Me too.
I don't, and then that drives people crazy. I'm like, yeah, but what happened to her? I don't know.
You ever read somebody else's book and it ends that way, and you're like, thank you.
But sometimes I'm frustrated by that too. I'm like, okay, I get it as a reader, but as a writer, like the ending of Sopranos, I'm like, I love the fact that we don't know. Like that's because that's life. Life, you just don't know. And there can be hope and there can be fear, but there's a lot of airspace in between those two things.
And also just leaving a character changed in a way that is like damaged, but hopeful that they'll find their way through it is to me the reality of life. It's like, I don't know, there's something about it that, and you know what it is? It's like, it makes me feel something, even if it's painful. And for me, like when I am reading or watching something, I want to feel something. I don't want to just be piecing together the plot. Like I'm not an Agatha Christie type reader. Like who did it? Who, this person, that
totally.
Person, this person knows that.
That
person,
doesn't interest me at all.
This person, and then this person was over here and over there, and I'm like, okay, now I feel like I'm playing chess or checkers or something, and I just don't want to do that. I want to be brought into something dark and painful and traumatic and life altering, and I want to feel it. I want to feel things. And then I go back to my life. I'm like, oh, my life is so happy.
But none of that works if I don't care about your character, right? And that's the whole thing is like, how do I create the universe of this person that, because what I love to do is I love to take somebody and I love to just slowly start to break them apart and keep throwing things at them. And by the end, I want them to be shattered. But because they're shattered, they have this whole new perspective of life. And maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, but they see things differently because they've been broken.
So you just described like the last book I wrote, which is like in the can or whatever, hopefully. It's the first time I've written a character who really doesn't have any past trauma. And the book opens with this trauma. She's a cold case cop who happens upon what we think is a mass shooting, and is actually turns out, well, I won't give it all away, but she ends up taking out the shooter, and it tortures her. Sure. And then, of course, the man whose life she saves ends up becoming obsessed with her and stalking her. So her life, which was not perfect but was pretty good, just she has this trauma within herself at what she's done, which is killed another human being. And then this man who, threatens her and her family and her entire life, really, and what she has to do to get out of it. And we leave her. And so that was the first time I'd written a character who started out not damaged. I usually start with like damaged characters, and then the reader has to see how damaged they are.
Right.
And it's like,
right.
Surprise, So it was actually really an interesting journey to have to write that. So
that becomes a very cathartic experience, right? Because then you're writing something about like, well, this is kind of more like me, perhaps. What would I do in this situation? And for me, like, for somebody who's pretty happy-go-lucky, but also thinks about like, if this ever happened, this would be terrible for me. Like, I don't know how I would handle it. Writing from a perspective of someone who's going through that is kind of helpful. It's kind of like, yeah, it would be terrible, but I'm kind of processing, the what ifs through my storytelling. And I don't know, maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. Who knows?
Well, I think it's look, this is what makes this genre so diverse, right? Because I think there are people who love to piece together the Agatha Christie whodunit type of stories, and then there are people who like to go really dark, and then people who like to have happy endings, and so there's so much to choose from, for the reader. But for like my sister's always telling me like, why can't you just write like one of these books that everybody's, like with a happy ending and not too dark? I'm like, I don't know. I can't. I tried. I can't. I don't know why I can't.
Where's the conflict? I think that's exceptionally hard to do. Like, to me, like, I love conflict, and I think it's so interesting. And if you're just writing whatever, say romance or whatever, I'm like, I don't know how, like, I would get bored because I'm like, nothing's happening, or it's all sex, or it's all whatever. I need somebody to like, their heart needs to be beating out of their chest. But the whole mystery thing drives me crazy too, because I don't write mysteries, but like we get a lot of mystery readers. And they'll be like, I totally guessed the ending. I'm like, I wasn't trying to hide the ending.
Right. That's not the point of the book. You're supposed to,
right. Or it didn't wrap it up. I'm like, it's not important to me that you know who did it, because it's not a whodunit. It's just like, I love
there's so few books where this happens, where I read every single word, because I just can't get enough of the pain and agony that's being written. And then I think, God, what is wrong with me? Like my Dark Vanessa, which is not really a thriller. I don't know if you read that book, but it was one of the darkest books I've ever read. And I read every word, even though it was so painful, but I couldn't stop. And I don't know what it is, but there was something very cathartic about it for me. But then I wrote a really much lighter book for Audible. Actually, I know your podcast is on there.
Yeah.
And it ended up on Audible because it was a little bit of a different feel than my other books. And it's about an autistic teenage girl who witnesses, well, we don't know exactly what she witnesses, but her boss at this sandwich shop is murdered, and they know she was in the building when it happened. And she narrates the entire story. And we found an amazing autistic advocate young woman who had never performed an audiobook, and they plucked her off of her YouTube and TikTok fame to narrate the book. And she did a brilliant job. And it was probably the most hopeful, lightest book that I've ever written. And it has a teen romance, and it has, it has some closure. And I wrote
it skews YA for sure. It sounds like
it's a little darker than YA, but because there are some older characters, there is a murder, so I wouldn't. But it's on the cusp, and it's but it's But I wrote it during the pandemic, and I wonder, you wrote your lighter book during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I wonder if that has something to do with it. I wrote it
for sure.
Crazy. My kids were all home from where they'd been. I had one who was still at home in high school, and the other two came back. It was in March, and I wrote it in like 4 weeks. At 4 a.m, I'd wake up with, a sense of dread, and and anxiety about, having to fill a refrigerator with steak and like more steak for three large young men, and then disinfect it all and go in with the, before we knew anything about it. I don't know if you remember this stage where like you didn't know how it was spreading. So I would separate the groceries in the garage and wipe down everything that had to go in the refrigerator. And I take off my shoes and make sure I didn't track in any of the virus, and then leave all the other stuff, the dry goods, out for 3 days to disinfect in the garage. I mean, it was insane. And so at 4 a.m, I'd wake up, couldn't get back to sleep. And I wrote American Girl.
That's so interesting, because actually I started out with my lighter book during the pandemic was an 18-year-old girl, 1987, who's not autistic, but she's a savant, one of 75 in the world.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny.
And my idea was like, she just leaves this facility she's in to go find her father, but she's never been she's brilliant, but she's never been out in the real world. And then, horrible things start to happen. And so I had to change her to be 21 because it was skewing to YA. But it was, that's so funny. I'm like, God, I can't get this girl out of my head. I want to see where she goes, what she does, how she deals with the real world, with all these intelligence, all the intelligence she has, but no practical experience of interacting with other humans.
Yeah. And I actually started out not writing an autistic girl, but writing sort of a teenage girl who was highly perceptive and also highly intelligent, but highly perceptive. And then when I started working with Audible, I realized that I was writing an autistic character, or that, and then I should just lean into it, and they were on board. And we could do that in an audio format because we didn't have an own voices problem, because it could be read by an autistic performer. Of course we had it vetted by a sensitivity reader, but having it read by Paige Lael was. It just enabled the book to be what it was clearly being written to be. And it's so interesting that we both wrote these young, sort of optimistic, but highly intelligent young girls who then encountered, these terrible things in the world.
Right. That is weird.
It's really weird.
Mine probably won't come out till like late next year.
What's going on?
I mean, to be fair, I just finished 4 grueling months of edits from it was the hardest edits I've ever had to do, because my editor's like, we've got to she's like, how do I pitch this? And I'm like, I don't know. That's your job.
That's your job.
I'm like, it's just the story I wanted to tell. In fact, when I started writing it, I hadn't even told anyone what I was writing. I'm like, I'm interested in this story, and I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't know if anyone will want it, but I want to see where it goes. So I'm glad it finally something happened.
I felt the same way. I didn't really care what happened to it. I had to write this girl who had been in my head, and actually she popped into my head, and you'll appreciate this, from the 1980s. She popped into my head months before, when I was at a bar and there was a cover band and they were playing American Girl. And it was actually one of the best cover bands I've ever seen. There must have been 18, like older men up there, clearly professional musicians, like the long gray ponytails. And but they had a horn section. They had all these string guitars and bass, all these things going on. And when they got up to do the final, chorus, they were all in harmony at the mics, playing their stuff and singing those last few lines of American Girl. And I was maybe had a little too much vodka, and I was dancing, and I just was brought back in time to when I was like 17, 18 years old. And it was such a visceral feeling, because Tom Petty that was it,
Right.
And it was so bizarre that I think at the time 53, and I was like, what the fuck happened here? Like, what? Wait, I had to sort of it was because that feeling was so alive inside of me.
Yeah.
That was brought about by this song.
That's amazing.
Full of hope, all my dreams, everything in front of me, all this stuff. And yet, no, actually, you're 53, you have 3 children, you have to go home and deal with your hangover tomorrow. But this idea of this girl full of hope just I couldn't get her out of my head.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I had to make all these bad things happen because that's what I write. But it was
Right.
so interesting. And
But yeah, so it's the same thing. It was an overwhelming sense of nostalgia in a way.
nostalgia. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what the pandemic caused in a lot of us. It's just like, can we just go back? Like, I know no time has been like great in this country,
Yeah.
but can we go back to when at least I was naive enough to think it was?
Right. I mean, in the 80s, we were like loading up our, cabinets with iodine and duct tape for
Right.
nuclear explosions. So,
Right. We were pretending that you could get under a desk and that would be okay
Right.
if a nuclear bomb fell on top of you.
Exactly.
Well, Wendy, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a quick little storytelling.
Oh gosh, I know, I'm terrified.
I
Okay.
know.
All right.
It's okay.
All right.
It's always a shit show, but it's fun. And we might have a little mind meld going on.
Get my writer's brain.
And it's real short. So that's so I have 3 books here. I'm going to ask you to pick one of them, and then we're going to pick a random page and a random sentence, and I'll read that sentence, and then I'll read it, and then either I can go first or you can go first. Just give me a couple sentences of maybe what happens next, and then we'll just see where it goes. So I have Stephen King's collection of short stories, Just After Sunset.
Okay.
R.H. Herron's Stolen Things.
Okay.
And Caldwell and Thomason's The Rule of 4. So choose one of those.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's go Stephen King.
All right. So give me a page between 1 and 500.
Oh my gosh.
Like how stressed out you are.
Let's go with page 55.
Okay. And then give me a sentence between 1 and 10.
7. Hopefully lucky 7.
Oh, this is a good one.
Oh God. Okay, here we go.
Okay, the character's name is M. E-M.
And do we know male?
It's a woman, girl. I'm not sure the age. M lowered her head against the steering wheel and cried for 5 minutes, letting out all the strain and horror from the last half year.
Okay. First, she sees her father. Next, her mother. Next, the 3 children who died that same night.
Deep in her mind, she knew that crying wouldn't wash away these stains. Nothing would get rid of the pain that she was feeling, except for one thing.
And in her heart, she knew it was wrong, that one thing that she had to do. And she wasn't even sure if it would get rid of the pain, but still, she knew it had to be done.
There would be temporary pain, of course, the real physical kind of pain, and it would be unlike anything she had ever known. But if she did it right, it would last only a few seconds. She eased her car forward just a few more feet. It was unnecessary, really. There was no guardrail that she had to run through, just a cliff and wide expanse of ocean that stretched as far as she could see.
She stepped on the brake and looked at the man standing in her headlights. She thought about it for one more second before gently tapping the gas, hitting his legs, which buckled and sent him barreling over the cliff.
We're calling it there. That's beautiful. See, that's not so hard. Within
right.
30 seconds, we have a murder.
She went from suicide to murder.
Right.
To avenge her entire dead family.
What did he do? He's just like walking his dog. And he just happens to be the wrong person.
And wouldn't that be a twist? Maybe she just has to kill everyone.
Yeah, that's in fact that, and then she realizes that through the murder, she actually is a salve for her own emotional pain.
Yes, because maybe she feels responsible for their death or has survivor's guilt, and so she has to cause herself pain by killing other people and feeling the remorse.
Right, and she has to convince herself that somehow this stranger did something terrible, and he's a representation of some kind of evil.
Completely sociopathic and doesn't care at all.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're writing this book together.
I think we are. You come up with a title and I'm going to start sketching. No outline, so we'll have a big problem there.
I just like the term buckling legs as a car goes through it. That's so awful. Well done. Well, what a pleasure talking to you, Wendy. I'm glad we got to finally connect and hang out. And this interview was exactly what I hoped it would be. It was just kind of a very casual conversation, and it was great to get to know your brain a little bit better.
Yeah, same here. And I hope to see you. Are you coming to BoucherCon?
I will be at BoucherCon.
Okay, me too.
We'll have a cocktail. You're a vodka person. It sounds like I'm a vodka person, so we'll have a drink.
We'll have a cocktail and catch up more. So this
sounds
was
good.
Really great.
Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So that is it. That was my conversation with the wonderful Wendy Walker. I told you were going to like that one. Super interesting. Go check out her books. She's a fantastic person just to hang out with and a fantastic writer. So both those things are good for her career. If you want to know more about her, please go investigate her at wendywalker.com. And if you want to learn more about me or my books or subscribe to my newsletter, just go to carterwilson.com, and there's all sorts of goodies on that website. That is it for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I certainly did. More episodes of Making It Up coming out soon. As always, so much appreciate you listening and or watching this. And until next time, take care.